All right, hello there, and welcome to another in the series of Conversations with Pat. My name is Pat Hume. I am a council member in the city of Elk Grove, and I'm also a candidate for Sacramento County Supervisor. And I'm hosting these forums as an opportunity to have a conversation with some subject matter experts in a casual format in order to, one, talk about big issues, try and find solutions, and also just to explore a little more in depth some of the things that are important to people not only within the 5th District of Sacramento County, but also all of Sacramento County. And so today's subject is going to be on economic development. This is a very important subject matter, given that it is really can be responsible for the overall quality of life of all the residents. And it's an area where government intervention can either work as a catalyst with great success, or and can have disastrous consequences if it's not managed appropriately. So joining me today, we have John Sullivan. He is an entrepreneur and developer and partner with Murieta Inn and Spa. We have Rachael Brown. She's the former economic development manager for the city of Elk Grove, and now the executive director for the Power in Alliance, which is a PBID covering 6.2 miles and over 10,000 businesses. And finally, Curt Haven, who is the former deputy city manager and economic development director for the City of Rancho Cordova. And he is interesting in that he came from the private sector and then got into government. So each is bringing a little different perspective today, and I welcome all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so let me begin, as I like to do, with a couple of overarching principles. These are things that I believe in my core, and sort of form the basis for thinking that I hold with respect to the subject that we're talking about. And the first is that rising tide lifts all boats, and nothing is more of a driver for prosperity, equity, and a high quality of life than a robust economy. Obviously, economic development plays an important role in that. But it's also important to have the boats pointed in the same direction, to take the tide when it serves, to quote Shakespeare. And in that regard, the county and regional governments, other cities, as well as non-governmental organizations, 501c4s, and PBIDs need to be partners working in tandem rather than siloed fiefdoms. Economic development includes housing, business attraction, startup, and retention / growth. And then finally, this is one that unfortunately we have to discuss a little bit, and that is that the pandemic hit the service sector hard. Up to 40% of the job losses were in the food, services, arts, and entertainment, and as many as 30% of those businesses may never recover or reopen. So it's an important subject, and you all are steeped in your knowledge, and I look forward to having some good discussions. So let's jump right into it. Rachael, I'll start with you, since you recently shifted roles, previously had an already tough job in one of the toughest environments imaginable, given the last couple of years of lockdowns and pandemic measures put in place. But what effect did the pandemic have on the momentum of economic development efforts, and what do you see as the most effective way to get things moving in the right direction again? Obviously, shoring up and providing relief to those sectors hit hardest by the lockdown and distancing measures, but also what can we just do to generally create a customer service-minded interface that is going to spur economic development?
Sure, yeah. Appreciate you having me on. I'm glad to be part of this discussion. So I think, as you said, the service industry was affected pretty hard by the pandemic when folks couldn't come and gather in crowds, ranging from tourism all the way down to the small business, mom and pop restaurants and whatnot. What has been curious and exacerbated this situation through the pandemic is cost of living, which is kind of separate than the pandemic itself, but it's made that gap even wider. So some of the people that are struggling are kind of have some basic foundational needs to answer first before trying to grow their business. So recovery is going to need to be, kind of checking in with the businesses. What can we do? Is that money going to be well directed to help them get back on their feet, or do they need some other, assistance before they can grow their business back? So kind of threw me for a curveball. This wasn't one of the the prompts, so I'm winging it a little bit. But I know we did some grant programs while I was in Elk Grove. The one challenge has been communicating any program that a jurisdiction has to the people that need the money. And so the communication, I think, is just going to be an uphill battle still. We try lots of things. I've seen it other jurisdictions. You have the Metro Chamber trying to put out word about programs. Sacramento County is putting out word about programs, down to the jurisdiction level, putting word out about programs, and making that connection has still been kind of challenging. What is positive is the local group Inclusive Economic Development Collaborative, the Sacramento IEDC, did get some ARPA money from the city to work with us PBIDs, where we're going to have a business community liaison. Basically, if you've ever done a business walk, we're going to have people dedicated to do that work in each of the PBID areas. I believe there's 11 total in Sacramento. So that's one example of kind of an innovative way to get that face time with the businesses to see what they need, so we can matchmake with the funds available and trying to help them recover. So I think that's a positive and a step in the right direction. We're going to see some action there here. Just this month, we're going live with that program. So
Awesome. You touched on some things that I think are probably going to be recurring themes in our discussion today, relative to communication and education of what's available as resources and assistance to these businesses, but also then sort of the idea of shepherding them through the process and making sure that we are working in tandem and not acting necessarily as a gatekeeper, but more of a facilitator. So that's a theme that I've been trying to tease out. So thank you. Sorry to throw you a curveball, but I think you handled it excellently.
thank you.
Curt, anything that you can add that you see as far as what you might see as a pathway towards jumpstarting recovery?
Well, Rachel's a pro. I really appreciate her answers. And Pat, I really agree with your description of economic development. What I see in the Sacramento region, especially since the pandemic, a lot of the businesses that got hurt were small entrepreneurial businesses. And a lot of times in this industry, they might be someone with a great talent or a great idea. For instance, I can brew beer and I want to be a brew brewery. Brewing beer and running a business are two separate items. So training, data, and lots of support from nonprofits, from cities itself, will actually make sure that when businesses come back from this pandemic, they are healthy. We are going to have probably a different clientele post-pandemic than we had pre-pandemic. And what I mean from that is people will still be working from home. People will still have a lot of freedom. How are we going to make sure that our businesses connect with the new employment that we're seeing? So everything that Rachael said, plus on top of that, I think more data from cities, more data from nonprofits, and the business walks are very, very successful. You get a lot of good information from them. But I think you're going to find when you do the business walks that, especially in your small entrepreneurial, they need more help with, say, accounting, HR, etc. Those are some of the things I'm seeing.
Excellent. It's interesting that you brought up brewing, because this is something that Rachael obviously knows well, but we just attracted Dust Bowl Brewing Company to town. And I was talking with one of the owners and asking him how come he has his space set up more as a relaxed lounge and not so much tables for food service. And he said, well, that they actually sublet the kitchen to a completely different operator. He says, I know how to make beer. I know about the margins on beer. I know about the business of beer. We are a tap house that has food available. We are not a restaurant that serves beer. And it was an interesting distinction, and it kind of touches, Curt, I think, to what you're talking about here, which is know what you do well and don't get outside your lane, so to speak, and then seek help. A sublet to a restaurant in this case, for somebody who knows the missing piece for the whole puzzle. So thank you for that perspective.
You're welcome.
Okay, John, switching gears a little bit. A study by a trade association ranked the Sacramento region as one of the 3 most difficult places to build multifamily housing, citing length of time for approval and inspections, high fees, and delays as some of the top barriers. While I know that your experience wasn't in with multifamily, I do know that you have experienced some of these hurdles firsthand. And so, can you give us an anecdote of what what it was like in your experience dealing with the county on developing the Murieta Inn and Spa?
Well, we were very many years designing our idea of building the hotel, the Murieta Inn, in conjunction with the Equestrian Center, which is a large economic driver in Rancho Murieta, which is, we have 6,000 people here in Rancho Murieta, and the Equestrian Center has more than 45 events at the center every year. So a lot of people go through there. 150,000 plus people go through there, and we've always needed a hotel. So in 2010, we approached the county about where can we put a hotel and what do we need to do and how do we get help. Brought all the players together, and we were assured that everything that we needed to get done would be expedited. This was a tremendous economic development opportunity. The county obviously is involved because they're in the TOT business, the transient occupancy tax business, and they assured us that we would be able to move real quickly. Well, the hotel did not open until January of 2017, some 7 years later, even though almost an unlimited amount of resources were poured into getting the hotel completed. It was incredibly frustrating. There were just a whole series of, as I call them, rules without reason that were being interpreted by building officials, and we were stopped on the project 3 separate times for interpretation of a set of plans that was already stamped and approved by the county. Our losses were huge, and before we even opened up, and then of course within 18 months we're in COVID. So it was quite an interesting startup, and it taught us a lot of lessons. And we deal with the same thing in development with, we put up some arenas. These are just engineered steel buildings with roofs on them, no sides, no walls. These aren't really buildings per se. They're arena covers. And in Sacramento County, we built 2 of those. The total cost to build those, because we had to put in sprinkler system, a new water system, and we had to go through a whole series of seismic tests. Each of those buildings cost about $440,000. There were 2 of those. We built an identical building size-wise out of engineered steel in Texas the very next year, and it cost $80,000, and the permits cost $500. In Sacramento, the permitting was over $100,000. So you can see how it's tough, very tough to be a developer and deal with high fees. For example, you're talking about multifamily housing. Every door in an apartment complex pays approaching $75,000 in fees before that apartment ever gets occupied. Pay some interesting fees in Sacramento County. Everybody in our part of the county pays a Swainson Hawk mitigation fee. We mitigate for oak trees. We have many road fees, $25,000 per unit of transportation fees, about $46,000 of building permit fees, $17,000 per unit of school fees, $5,000 of park fees, and then there are the inevitable water, sewer, and drainage hookup fees. So it's hugely expensive. It's almost impossible for anybody to figure out how we can have affordable housing when it costs that much just to design and build and have an apartment or a house in Sacramento County. So I know we have this huge problem in Sacramento where we don't have enough affordable housing, and yet our standard of living in Sacramento County has I think our median income now is approaching $100,000. So there's a disconnect between the planning and building process and what goes on out in the real world.
Well, first of all, I just got distracted by the fact that I can see everyone's faces now. So welcome, everyone. Good to see you. John, let me ask you this question, and those are great points that you make, that when you're looking at, $400,000 to $500,000, $400,000 to $500,000 in cost to produce one affordable housing unit, that's an oxymoron. There's nothing affordable about that unit except for the person that's going to be subsidized to be able to get into it. Obviously, with all new development, there is a nexus that has to be made with respect to the impacts that development has on the existing community, to making sure that they're not burdening existing development and paying their quote unquote fair share. But let me ask you this question. Obviously, there's a significant capital stack that has to happen at the front end of a project, and there is a time value to money as well as carrying costs that have to be factored in. Would it, barring lowering the fees overall, if there were certain impact fees where the trigger could be moved from permit issuance or entitlement level to occupancy level, does that move the needle a little bit, do you think?
That certainly helps. We did that in the Rancho Murieta Community Services District in our financing agreements. We moved the impact fees to when the water meter gets hooked up, so all those fees get paid right before somebody moves in. So that is a big benefit, to be able to defer those fees until occupancy or near occupancy. Yeah, definitely big help. The other thing that's quite interesting is the timeline it takes. We have application into the county since 2014 to build villages, some remaining villages in Rancho Murieta, and we have yet to be in front of the Planning Commission of the Board of Supervisors with those plans. We spent 27 months. We spent 27 months on a 6-month charrette with the community, talking about how to improve the villages so that they interface well with the existing community. We have around 2,500 homes in Rancho Murieta. We have 5,000 permitted under the Plan Development Ordinance. We're clearly building or planning to build less density than is in the PD ordinance, and yet we are now going on our 14.6, going on our 7th year of waiting for our environmental document to get turned out so that we can discuss the entitlements, getting the tentative maps for those projects, and the time value of money, you speak about that. If we had not had a number of other projects going in Rancho Murieta, we never would have been able to carry that land for that many years. It's a near impossibility to start a project, put a lot of resources into it, buy land, and just go into a continuing holding pattern, waiting for the entitlement side of the business. It's why builders go broke. So we're very empathetic to some other means to get, I guess it would be a signal that the county would be favorable to approval much earlier in the process. Zoning is very complex in Sacramento. If you look at the zoning code of Sacramento County and you were to go to the zoning administrator and said, why can I do this on this piece and not this on that piece? It's very difficult for them to explain why the little nuances in the zoning code. It's a very detailed zoning code. I mean, it's literally hundreds of pages and impossible for a first timer to ever go in there and figure it out. So zoning code, simplification, some means to go to the planning commission and then be turned over to design review and get the planning commissions saying that, yeah, this project on this site is approvable as long as you go through the design review and then bring us a project. It's going to get favorable treatment way early in the process, rather than going through all of the expense and then get the planning commission and then say all of a sudden, oh, this doesn't fit the mold. And then you've wasted theoretically years. And I just see, gosh, if we could find a way to have, I don't want to say a pre-approval, but a signal to go ahead that it all fits within the pew. The county planners always are, they're always busy. There's hundreds and hundreds of meetings they deal with, and to get somebody to sit down on a regular basis and work through the planning issues, it's hard because I mean, obviously the last 2 years have been really hard because scheduling meetings and getting people together when they're not even in the offices, and you need to deal with something. It takes a lot of scheduling and planning. Hopefully the world will get back to more normal here in the next, by the end of this year, I hope. Because it is, I've never been through anything quite as personally devastating as having to lay off everybody at a hotel and everybody in an equestrian center on the same day. And there are, we've been fortunate that we were able to get PPP support for the hotel and for some of the equestrian center activities, but everybody, it's like their whole world is working on overtime because there's no peace when you are dealing with a pandemic. You don't know when it's going to come roaring back. You don't know how it's going to affect your family. You don't know how it's going to affect your business. It's amazing to me that we're just not all exhausted.
I think a lot of us are.
I know when I go out into the public, I see a lot of angry people, and they're not normally angry people. They're angry because they haven't had anybody to take this out on for the last 2 years. It's just been total frustration, and so we all need a reset. Let's reset, regroup, and figure out how to simplify everything. Don't make everything so complicated.
So I'm going to throw you a softball as we get towards the end here. But you've brought up an interesting point. So before I move on to the next point that I wanted to make, I know Rachael firsthand would shake the bushes from inside the walls at City Hall to be an advocate for small business and really try and shepherd through the process. So one of the ideas that I've had is creating, for lack of a better word, an office of an ombudsman, or somebody that can be a one point source of contact for somebody that doesn't know how to navigate the intricacies and the bureaucracies, and sort of get that the straw poll early on, as John was referencing, to say, look, if you go down this path with these criteria, you've got a high likelihood of moving forward, so that there's not a lot of wasted time. How do you think that's a good idea, Rachel? Do you think
I think it's a
that's
spectacular idea if that person actually had the power to get everybody's attention that they need to get when something isn't working the way it should. It's not just if you do these things, but here's who you need to go to, and those people need to be able to be held responsible to respond within a reasonable period of time. Absolutely.
the org chart would have to be set up as such that there is some speaking with authority when that person is trying to track down a progress report.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you want me to respond, Pat?
Sure.
So you're absolutely right. I spent lots of time going around City Hall. Thankfully, Elk Grove City Hall wasn't too big of a building, but all the same, I would go to Public Works, or I would go to Planning Department. I would go to Building Department, and oftentimes Economic Development is that department where all the issues, kind of get worked out. And so I think, to your point, it really needs to be a staff, employee person of the organization, because hopefully that person's good at building rapport and with their peers, and kind of asking those challenging questions, usually without the applicant's audience, right? You do that behind the scenes and try to go, okay, look, why did you do that? Are you sure? And okay, and you try to understand if there is a true ordinance or a true, rule that, okay, this is from a legal standpoint, or is it just because this is always the way we've done it? And I think that's some of the things that government really needs to do. Is, if the answer is this is the way we've always done it, is there any other reason besides that? Because if not, let's try to get a little creative. And I know sometimes I would bump heads with colleagues at City Hall, but you're trying to get to the why. Is it a legitimate reason, or is it because you just don't want to think of things in a new way? And I think that's going to be most successful with an internal staff person, because you have a chamber or some other person trying to tell you what to do, kind of an outsider, and that's not always well received by the staff, and I think you get a little further, especially then that person builds those bridges. They need to know the right questions to ask. I sat in a number of pre-application meetings with my colleagues, building and planning staff, sitting there watching the applicant ask certain questions, and understanding there was not certain things brought to light. And I would ask the questions sitting in those meetings and say, oh, well, what about this? Well, what if they did it this way? Because I think sometimes it can be a bit robotic, where the building and planning staff are like, I go through my checklist, I say the things that I always say, it's these 12 things, and that's it. And they don't try to do a little scratch the surface and get a little creative. And through the pandemic, economic developers were kind of pivoting to do these grants and small business assistance, which just spread them super thin. So, maybe it is I don't know if it's a development services person that gets kind of some training from economic development ways of creative problem solving, but yeah, I think internal is a good idea.
From your mouth to God's ears, it's a mindset thing. If you're starting from a place of how do we make this happen, or what barriers are we putting up in our own way, and breaking loose that cartilage of this is the way we've always done it, is so critical. So Curt, obviously a variety of housing stock availability is directly tied to economic development. You have your workforce, your move in, your move up, et cetera. Rancho Cordova has a unique imbalance for the region in that your jobs to housing ratio is obverse from just about every other jurisdiction. Aside from the escalating prices, how does the unavailability or unattainability of housing affect the employment sector?
Well, robust housing cycle is what's important. You can't have too much of the lower income, you can't have too much middle, but you need executive homes also. So one reason that Rancho Cordova Incorporated was to create that executive middle management type of housing. And in the last 15, 16 years, been very, very successful in that. But what's important, really, truly, if I can just go back one more spot to Mr. Sullivan and what Rachael was saying, what developers and entrepreneurs and people who build housing, but also entrepreneurs and small businesses, when they come to a city, all they're looking for is one thing: certainty. Can I get this done? And if you empower your city employees, your directors, your line staff to make decisions to actually help that person instead of putting them off and saying, I need to check with this person, I have to go to this department. There should be no departments in citihoods. It should be all economic development. Planning's one piece of building the communities, building the residential places for homes. The building department is just one piece of building houses correctly and safely. It should be all tied together. They shouldn't be silos. And if you don't empower those people to make decisions, developers like Mr. Sullivan are going to get stuck what I call the hamster wheel. And you just continue to go on and on and on and on. And nobody makes a decision. So we need decision makers in government. I came from the private industry, was blessed to work in the new city of Rancho Cordova, but I was in shock. It took me years to get used to that cities have no timeline. They decide when and where and how, and they're not in a hurry. They don't have to be in a hurry. We need to change that. Cities also really, truly don't understand economic development as a whole, because most of the people in your cities have never made a payroll. They've never been in Mr. Sullivan's shoes. They've never had to lay off family members or employees that are hardworking because of another policy or a new policy from the state or a new policy from government or even say the pandemic. So the real world experience is kind of missing in a lot of city government. So they need to have empathy. So going back to the housing, it's really important in today's world that we provide housing for all levels of economics, and workforce housing is probably, I think, one of the most important types of housing to keep our workers in place. And it's going to change. Not everyone's going to have a single home with a large backyard. We're going to be going to more apartments, condos, townhomes, living a little closer together. And if by doing that, we need to empower our city employees to make decisions.
That's a fascinating concept. Empathy is an important part of economic development. I mean, really, it's what it comes down to is walk a mile in their shoes and the frustrations and struggle that they're feeling, just to try and make something happen to provide housing, to provide businesses, to provide jobs, to provide whatever it is. And, we could be working better together, as opposed to figuring out how we disagree.
So the ombudsman idea is critical. And it's critical for developers like Mr. Sullivan, but it's also critical for little small mom and pops who come in and say want to move a wall, or want to add to their facility, or want to have even simple things like a tenant improvement. I've seen tenant improvements in cities and counties take years because no one has taken that opportunity to actually walk through it and understand what is the vision, what's the goal, and with certainty lay out, here are the steps that you have to take. The worst thing ever, Mr. Sullivan has seen this, is going back and forth to departments. Well, now you've got your grading permit. Okay, thank you. What's next? Now you got this. Oh, I didn't know about that. Oh, I didn't know about this. And it just goes on and on and on in that hamster wheel. Certainty can be done today with technology and with proper decision making. We can speed this up.
Yeah, I have many friends who make a living being consultants to guide people through the entitlements process. They're the only ones I think who would not like to see government work more nimbly and effectively.
I would like to be put out of work very quickly, believe me.
Yes. Yeah, you're trainable, Curt. We can redirect you into a new career. So, Rachael, a recent study by Brookings, and this will be the last question before we move on to that softball, talking about what if we could rule the world. Recent study by the Brookings Institute showed that nearly a third of residents in the region struggle to make ends meet. And this is particularly true amongst people of color and those with lower education levels. So, in your new role, I have to imagine that you are focused on reinvestment and redevelopment in aging corridors. How can we incentivize the development of these areas and lower the barriers and costs to spur revitalization of a disenfranchised neighborhood?
Yeah, that's a good question. And largely the district includes a lot of industrial and manufacturing businesses. The residential's on the peripheral, but they're, as you well know, issues don't stop at the boundary line of any given boundary. It's a regional thing. One of the things that is curious that I'm getting acquainted with in my new role is cannabis businesses are here in the district. And one of the programs, I was actually going to speak to this in terms of helping disadvantaged communities, is they have a opportunity reinvestment and equity program related to cannabis called CORE, CORE. And so one of the things, and just kind of reviewing the program as I'm still getting up to speed, but they try to alleviate that business operations permit. So you still have to do a business plan. They'll help you a little bit more with the business plan. They do a little more hand holding and helping make sure the idea is solid in terms of, being a business operator, entrepreneur. And then trying to waive the business operating permit, which I don't know, I'm still getting acquainted with how much that is. I don't think that's like impact fees. It's not thousands and thousands of dollars. It's maybe a couple thousand, but kind of like the Small Business Development Center does with helping with business plans, but they're doing that at the city side and not doing a handoff to what you're saying, Curt, is I think they're getting the runaround and going, oh, I have to go somewhere else to get help. Okay. That checklist, whether you're a small business or a large business, can be exhausting and you get disappointed or discouraged so easily. And this particular program is just related to cannabis, but I think there could be some lessons learned in how do you take that and extrapolate that and do it for more than one business type. I don't know. I think during the pandemic, that county health department was waiving renewals for restaurants because restaurants were so, so hardly hit that they're like, oh, even that renewal for my health permit, it's cost money. I don't have that money. I just had to close my doors for a year or however long it was that no one could go out. So maybe it's not changing the requirements to operate the business, but it's more those barriers to entry can sometimes be the permit fees or even those TIs that can be super confusing. Is there a way, I know Elk Grove had the TI Tuesday. Is there something else that you can implement to where, I think Rancho has a similar program where you get to go to the building counter and in one day you get building planning and fire for, certain kinds of projects, but the small ones. And so you alleviate that time because it may not be that they don't have the cost to do the TI permit, but it's the going back and forth and this and that. And then, I think Curt had a good example too on the brewery. It's true for most small businesses. You are good at your craft, your hobby, your thing that you wanted to make a living doing. Oftentimes you're not good at HR or the, oh, I got to pay my employees. What's this other thing? So anything you could eliminate that's at least within the jurisdiction's control to say, hey, how can I either reduce that permit fee or give you a little more hand holding? Kind of goes back to that customer service. Just need a little more customer service to help these guys uncover the opportunities and then make those necessary connections to, launch their business essentially.
Absolutely. So there's an aspect of shared values, really, that if we can establish what is good for all of us as far as what's going to cause that rising tide, then how do we each put a little skin in the game to make it happen? And government should not be immune from that effort.
Yeah.
All right, John, we promised it. Here it comes. It's a big softball. If you could wave a magic wand to make the county more responsive and nimble, what would that look like?
Wow.
First time I've ever seen John Sullivan speechless, by the way.
Again, I think the thing that and you said it very clearly, Curt, was certainty. If we knew that the responses had to be within a prescribed timeline, then a legitimate schedule could be put together on almost every project, and that leads to successful conclusions in most cases. it's I've seen when we came out of the 2008 economic crisis, there were a lot of people who had been working on projects for a long time that just said they're done. They just handed it in their developer jacket and said, we're not, we can't. It's the numbers don't work anymore, and it's we don't see any horizon where it will work. And now, what is it? Not that many years later, here we are in a kind of a boom, a housing boom, and it may not be the best kind of housing boom. Prices are high. First-time home buyers are having a tough time. It's feast or famine in the real estate business, and so just having an inventory of lots for builders and being able to process land to turn it into development, and having some certainty of how long that'll take, I think those are really, really crucial to making things work better. I don't understand why we don't do something when we keep talking about affordability. And there's been a number of different programs. There's affordable housing ordinance for Sacramento County's changed 3 or 4 times just in the last 20 years. I don't think they have a solution. The thing that I would rather see affordable housing inside subdivisions rather than be taken out of subdivisions and make everything affordable somewhere else. And that's kind of that not my backyard mentality. And I'm all about, I'd rather have the economic profile within the community, because everybody's striving to improve themselves. So having moderate and low income housing inside a more affluent subdivision, to me, if the county would just say, okay, you can pay those fees over 100 years, pay those fees over 50 years, or waive all those fees for the affordable units. Because if you can't provide that unit to somebody that couldn't quite make it to get an affordable, does that person end up on the street? And what are we paying per a homeless person that's on the street? I'd be willing to bet you it's more than the cost of a house when you average it across how many people we're trying to help just in this county. The state's in a crisis with the homeless population. We're spending billions and billions and billions of dollars, which could go into truly within the community affordability. Rather have the community keep an eye on and help people who might have a substance abuse problem or an alcohol problem or a mental health problem than to have them out on the street with a tent. That's the most disgusting thing for people like me, born and raised in California, to see the tents under the freeways. And that to me is just, it's not California. So, that's where I'd go, is find some way to subsidize within the existing subdivisions rather than trying to have some housing agency deal with these parcels of land where affordability can exist. All that says is that will always be a low income area. I'm not too keen on that. Those things turn out badly just as often as they turn out well. So that's where I'd go.
There was a lot baked into that response. Maybe you and I will have a conversation offline, because it's a very interesting concept of how we potentially use sources of funding that would be put to other programs in order to offset, bottom line impacts to incorporate a variety of housing within one particular subdivision map, for example.
So I have a concept that I think about all the time, is these accessory dwelling units. In our community, Rancho Murieta, we're kind of in, you know, we're in the when you talk about discretionary income, we're kind of in the top tier, and yet from my standpoint, I see accessory dwelling units as an opportunity to do some of that affordability, even if it's not mother-in-law quarters or two families or whatever, is to try to do that in the accessory dwelling unit that might become a subsidized rental for affordability. And I think that's a fairly efficient way to get it done. You don't have to pay for the land twice. You don't have to pay for the impact fees twice, but you get an accessory dwelling unit which could have multiple uses, and you got somebody to keep an eye on the property because there's a landlord in theory there. Just thoughts.
I'm
And
all in favor
love
of ADUs as a solution as long as they aren't foisted upon us by the state. I don't like the state
I
taking away
agree.
our local land use control.
That's happening now.
It absolutely is. Curt, how about you? If you could wave a magic wand and change one thing at the county, what would it be?
Wow. Well, my history is I came from the private world, ran a campaign to help incorporate Rancho Cordova, and then was asked to stay, knowing that I'm not a good government person. Okay? I believe in competition. I believe in consequences. I believe in failing, and I believe in excelling. Those things are hard to commit in government. Government is its own entity. We've created an industry of government that I think we need to really stop and look really hard at. And I'm not talking about Rancho Cordova specifically. I'm talking about government in general. Is it serving the people? Is it providing the service that it was meant to be? And there's lots of examples of where it's become its own entity. And when you say they need to provide monies for low income, they is us. When you say they needs to provide more grants, they is us, and we are the taxpayers. So again, at the start of my talk, when I started with the government, there is no timeline. There's also really they're working with other people's money. So to make decisions, do we spend $1 million here, or 2 million here, 3 million over here? It's kind of like working with popcorn. You just pop it up and off it goes. If it was money coming out of your pocket, would you make that decision? If it was money coming out of your business, would that decision be made to hire that consultant or to make that, grant? So I think we need to be careful. Without going back to the basics of jobs, housing, and education, government won't survive. There won't be jobs. So we need to be, I think, lower the responsibility that government has to us, and also look very closely, is it performing? There's no consequences for not performing in government. Ask Mr. Sullivan how long it took for his project to be done. Nobody lost their job. Nobody didn't get a bonus. Nobody didn't get paid. Nobody didn't get a raise because it took 2 to 3 years for his project to go by. In the private world where there's competition, that would never exist. Mr. Sullivan would have been treated more professionally, and his project would have been approved in months, not years. So I know I sound anti-government. Cityhood for Rancho Cordova was awesome, and it is awesome, and it's a great thing. But we have to be careful that it doesn't grow out of control and it doesn't consume us. It needs to be responsive. It needs to be proactive, and there needs to be consequences for not being responsive or proactive. So, especially in Sacramento County, what I'd like to see is the top level management and the line management interacting with each other more. Middle management tends to block and tends to make sure that their hierarchy and that their department is still going to be ran the same as it was before. That may not be good. So we want the decision makers, when you become elected, sir, and the line people to work together to simplify programs, to bring certainty to government, and to have consequences if that doesn't happen. That's how I would run government.
I believe the document begins, "We the people, by the people, for the people."
And please, I'm not being negative on the city of Rancho Cordova or the city of El Grove. It's just my opinion as a retired. I was in the government for 18 years. Great experience. Lots of positive actions happen. You know, government's the one that goes in the slums and cleans up, you know, the apartments. Government's the one that can go to a landlord and say, you must fix this problem or I'll put you in jail. And that's something private world can't do. The government does have a lot of responsibility, and I think that's where it lies. But when it comes to planning and also, you know, getting permits and going through plans, and I think there needs to be a better way. I would like to see that done through a private industry and compete so that it's done more effectively. There's no
Sure.
competition in government.
Sure. Government's primary role, monetary policy and providing for the common defense, and everything else ought to have a level of common sense applied to it, as you say. Rachel, how about you? You come from a different perspective, um, either at the city or at the county, or how would you see government being to more customer service minded?
Yeah, I think being about 7 weeks old in my new role here, getting acquainted with the city of Sacramento way and the relationship with the county, it does seem like there needs to be, this is an instance that's not about one entity, but rather interagency collaboration. I think that, as was mentioned, you know, there's some really messy, quite literally messy issues going on right now with homeless, and it's affecting the downtown area, it's affecting parts of where I now work. But businesses are going to want to come and invest in the region when you drive around and see some of the mess. And I'm not sure, there's kind of like a who's on first right now. Like cities, oh no, that's not our thing. County's like, oh no, that's not our thing. And so I think, you know, trying to pull back from some of the high level politicking that can happen and get down to like, what are the issues and how can we work together and stop being either finger pointing or against, or, you know, instead of being against things, let's try to collaborate for a solution and try to make some progress there, because economic growth is not going to want to come here much longer the way some of the parts of the city look. It's just, it's going to be tough, you know. So I think that, and then as you mentioned about the housing typology, the impact fees just keep growing and growing and growing. And I know that, you know, there's no, Rosevelle's one of the few examples of a full service city in the region, so they can kind of control the bottom line somewhat. But with California wanting to be innovative with, you know, sustainability and new construction techniques, they keep layering on these requirements on the building code. Eventually makes, you know, the cost to build the dang thing like super expensive. And then you got the impact fee here and there. So the bottom line is you can never change the housing typology mix without addressing that kind of elephant in the room. It's like, how are you want the developers to eat that additional cost and just make the housing price cheaper? How? They can't even cover some of their costs right now, you know? So I don't know if that's necessarily a county thing, but it's just, you know, something to be thoughtful of. And I think, as was mentioned earlier, if you take some of that money, I forget what we were saying, is by the time you, I think Curt mentioned, you spend it on homeless services, you might be able to put that into offsetting some of those fees to then make a you know, housing type more affordable to that resident, you know. So I would say the collaboration among agencies is really, it's a critical point right now to get that started, I think.
Amen. We are stronger together than we are apart. So, all right, let's play a little game here. Since we're with you, we'll stay with you. We're going to mark certainty as already taken, but give me one word that would be a part of any change or solution to help promote prosperity.
Maybe resources, and I don't always mean financial. So I'm dealing with more of kind of some workforce development stuff over here in the Power In area. How do we get, as manufacturing and those kind of jobs change with technology, it's no longer necessarily just working with your hands and having that skill set. You also have to have some computer knowledge. So I think a lot of focus is given to 4-year degrees and higher education, and that has its place. There's also still people that need to work in a trade and do that, but they don't know about it. And I know there's lots of talk in the region about how to make that pivot, but in order for these businesses to be successful, they need access to workforce. The workforce needs to be skilled in whatever job they're going to do. It all kind of works together to create those multiple levels of workforce. Not everyone can be 4-year degree or higher and have those office jobs. So.
All right. You did an excellent job of responding to curveballs. These other guys had the benefit of knowing what the game is ahead of time. So, Curt, we'll go to you next. One word that you think you'd implement to promote prosperity.
Not sure it's a word, but partnering.
Partnering is a word.
Partnering. So in any jurisdiction you walk into, if you're a small business or an entrepreneur or even like Mr. Sullivan, you're basically greeted with a list of everything you can't do. Why don't we get a list of everything that we can do? And at the same time, that person, and I love to see Rachael's smiling face when I walk through the economic door in the city of Elk Grove at some time, that person can say, I'm so glad you're here. We want you in our city. And here's the 4 things that we're going, not 3, 4 things that we're going to do to help you get through this system. And I'm going to follow you through this project. And we're so glad you're here. And you should never get a piece of paper, a document, a form, anything that starts with, you must. And I think just changing the scope of how government treats businesses. There's a really good story of the VSP in Rancho Cordova, the CEO at that time, thinking about moving to Texas. The word got around. A mayor of the large Texas city sent him an iPhone and says, "This is my home phone number. Special phone for Roger Valine, but this is my home phone number. When you're ready to leave, call this number." I applauded that. I thought I wanted to go to Texas and tell that guy he did it right. And did Roger Valine go to Texas? I really couldn't tell you. VSP is still headquartered in California, Rancho Cordova, but believe me, they're looking at Texas along with everyone else. And it's that handshake, it's that cooperation, it's partnering. Like Rachael said before, partnering with your for-profit, your nonprofits, without agendas. The only agenda is for that applicant to be successful.
Yeah. You bring up a great point that, as an old adage that I was told way back when, is that you can sell an excellent product at a premium, or you can sell a lousy product at a discount, but you shouldn't be trying to sell a lousy product at a premium.
Nope.
Go ahead. Mr. Sullivan, you are last up here. What is one word you might throw out to promote prosperity? You're on mute, sir. Still on mute.
I'm here. Actually, I think accountability is the one word, but it's almost like the government has to have. I'm all in, Curt, with your culture of yes. They got to have the culture of yes when you are involved in facing the public for anything, whether it be a business license or whether it be $100 million arena or project. It's got to be the culture of yes, and it shouldn't have to be that you know somebody to be able to get an economic incentive. Everybody should have the same list of economic incentives. So accountability, as if you're going to be audited and looked at by the Attorney General if you don't have a culture of yes, because that's exactly what's got to happen in my mind.
Great. Anything that I didn't ask that I should have?
We could go all night.
Well, listen, I really appreciate all of you taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for this discussion. We did have a little bit of technical difficulty with the cameras early on, but the audio still was very valuable. And, as I try to explore these issues and try to hone in on what I would do differently at the county if I'm given the opportunity to serve, this is an important aspect, is making government more nimble, more eager, more responsive, more customer service minded, with a culture of yes. And I think Rachael would attest that I've tried to do that and maintain that in the city of Elk Grove. But it's one of those things that takes constant revision, continuous improvement, and you should always be auditing your processes, as Mr. Sullivan says, and this is something that I'm looking to do as we go forward. That the decisions cannot just be in the boardroom; they have to be partnered with the agencies and the community and the folks bringing the plans forward. So I appreciate your time. I wish you all well, and thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for taking the time to watch this, and I hope it's been a valuable discussion for you as well. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.